Sunil, thank you very much. Welcome. Today's session is a 100 level session on navigating the database migration journey. We're going to be talking to you a little bit about how to go about thinking about migrating your databases to AWS. We'll talk about it primarily from a programmatic perspective and talk to you about the options that you have programmatically to migrate your databases. So with that, I'm joined here today by Sunil Madhugary, the CTO of Customs and Border Protection. So we're going to be talking a little bit both from an AWS perspective, but most specifically from a Customs and Border Protection perspective to talk about their journey and how they've worked through these different challenges and decisions. So we'll talk a little bit about U.S. Customs and Border Protection, just about the agency in general and about their mission, which is large. Every time I learn more about it, it gets bigger. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges that they faced and why they went on this journey, the decisions they had to make, how they worked backwards from the problem, another very Amazonian thing, to determine where it was that they wanted to be and then how to go about getting there. Some pieces about the different migration options that they utilized, what their keys to success are, and where they are today, which is not finished, but absolutely underway, and the lessons that they've learned along the path. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Sunil, and he's going to talk a little bit about Customs and Border Protection.
Sure. Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everybody. Sunil Madhugary, currently the CTO for CBP, and also happens to be the acting CDO, Chief Data Officer, also for CBP right now. So I have two hats. CBP, as you know, you must have heard in the news, very large agency, 60 to 65,000 employees we have worldwide. And the agency, as you can imagine, our primary goal is to keep this country safe, right? We have two charters, allow legal trade and legal travel. Those are two things we do. It's a massive, massive amount of work for us. And let me just quickly start by giving a shout out to two of the folks, or the two of the important people who do keep us safe every day. So, our border agents and officers do a phenomenal job, and I don't think that they give enough credit as to what they do. I just want to give them a round of applause, please, if you can join me for that. They keep us safe on a daily basis, and we should be very, very thankful as to what we do. And I'm extremely fortunate and also very proud to work as a CBP employee. I came from the private sector myself, so I've seen both sides of the world. And so CBP, I'll just give you a little statistic, right? A number of employees you saw. We process about 500,000, this is each day, by the way, 500,000 customers a day. People coming in. In fact, one of the main person who is responsible for that is in the room right here, my colleague and XT, J. Alasundaram, right here. And they're responsible for 500,000 people per day, right? And there are 17 petabytes of storage we have, and about 7 to 8 billion transactions a day we process. So you can imagine how large we are, right? By the way, this does not contain all the ships and everything else, containers, everything we scan on a daily basis. So, any guesses, what the U.S. economy is? About $20 trillion, right? So CBP is responsible for $6 trillion trade every year. We collect, this is all public knowledge. I'm not giving any inside information to you. So we are responsible we collected $96 billion of tariffs last year. We don't see anything, by the way. We need money, by the way, in case you talk to a congressman, tell them we need money. So we don't see any of those, but we're responsible for that. So if you're driving a foreign car or wearing foreign clothes or wearing a foreign wristwatch, guess what? It's come through CBP ports. Please remember that. And somebody has, made sure that the right goods are coming into the United States. So CBP has an amazing mission, massive mission, and I've been talking to Adrian about this for a few days now. End of the day, right, what we are doing is, my job is fairly straightforward. What I have to do is make sure I provide tools and services to the border agents and the officers who keep us safe every day. That is the number one goal. If I'm not doing that, I'm not doing my job as a CTO or the job as the acting chief data officer. So there's some stats I'm looking at right now. It's amazing. I mean, there are 913,000 pounds of illegal drugs we seized. You heard about what's going on the southwest border. Ukraine, think about what we have done with Ukraine. Do you know Afghanistan, which was Operation Afghanistan Welcome? The gentleman right here, Jay, and his team, along with my team, we airlifted about 67,000 folks from Afghanistan to safety. That's the largest airlift in the history of this planet, including World War II. So that's all CBP's processing because of that, right? So I want to make sure that you understand the scope and breadth. And what this does is, ultimately, we're talking here about data, right? So this generated tons of data. That's the difference now. Also, the kind of data we were generating has changed. I was telling Adrian, of course, we generate regular transactional data a lot, right? But we're also generating now, we call the operation technology data, which is your sensors or drones and everything else. People ask me, what's your job, Sunil, as a CTO? I said, body-worn cameras to drones and everything in between. That's what we do at CBP, right? So we are from that perspective, very diverse kind of technologies all over the place, and appreciate all the vendors and partners who work with us. So I'm looking forward to working with them in the future too. Next one.
Yeah, there you go. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges that CBP faces. So Sunil, you and I have talked a little bit about this. Expanding analytics, artificial intelligence, data science needs, I think you touched on that, right? The types of data and the amounts of data are changing. Also, what we want to and need to be able to do with that data is changing. We've talked about the need to become more agile, the need to move to microservices, and as that happens, the need for each microservice to own its own persistence. I know you'll talk about this in a second, but a data center exit and a looming hardware refresh provides an impetus and an urgency to this need to move from on-premises to cloud service providers. And then finally, a desire to reorient the budget from CapEx to OpEx from large legacy hardware to be able to essentially buy compute and storage and database by the drink. So Sunil, could you talk a little bit about particularly some of those challenges and how the migration is helping you address some of those challenges?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Adrian. For us, so as you can imagine, right, even 4 to 5 years back, some of these buzzwords, analytics and AI, ML, these were still buzzwords in the industry, and vendors were trying to figure out what that really means. It's no longer the case anymore, right? So what we have done, CBP is actually quite ahead in its journey in multiple ways, and we have to, right, for obvious reasons. So what we did was we had to figure out how do we scale. Security is a big component to that. So we had a federal mandate of getting out of the data center by supposed to be 2025, but may probably get extended beyond that. So because of that, we had to look at options as to how do we take our data and move it somewhere else. It's not only from that perspective, but also especially with the data growth and with the exploding data growth what we have seen in the last 10 years or so, how do you store data, where does the data go, how do you secure it, right? How do you access it? And also scalability, reliability are the two very, very important features for us, right? So what we have done is we came up with this called a technical reference architecture. We build that, and that's kind of a Bible currently within CBP to provide direction within the agency as to what to do. So what we did was initially we said, let's start doing some of the low-hanging fruits. In fact, XTJ, some of his team did a great job taking. If you do global entry or some of those components, is all running on the cloud right now, and his team is responsible for that. Those are the first initial applications we took to the cloud, and it's a little bit easier because it was like a one-to-one kind of shift. We did some refactoring and things like that, but still it was a little bit easier. But now some of the bigger ones are coming in, and so we'll talk a little bit about that.
So how do you get there, right? That's why we're here. We've talked a little bit about the scope and scale of the challenges that CBP faced. We've talked about a little bit, Sunil has touched upon the approach, which was start with some of the easier things, build that confidence, and as you move in and gain more experience and more operational expertise with operating in AWS, then to be bring on the larger, more complicated systems. And so we talk a lot at AWS about working backwards from the problem, about understanding where you want to be at the end, and then start working backwards from that point. So in the case of CBP, it's working backwards. 2025, we have to bring out the brooms and we have to give back the data center. So we have to walk back from that date and think about all of the different challenges that we have to overcome in order to make it there. Now, what's key is the second piece of this, which is that there's no one size fits all. There's no one path. We're going to talk about this when we talk about, on the next slide, about lift and shift and re-platforming and modernization. CBP has used all of these. It's not you do one or the other. It's all of the above. You have to look at individual workloads to see what makes the most sense for each of them. The collaborative effort with executive leadership is also key. We talk at AWS a lot about migrations and modernizations are successful when they have executive leadership from the top. It speaks volumes that I'm here joined by the CTO of Customs and Border Protection, that we have that high-level executive leadership that is saying that this is really key and understands and is willing to dive into the details to make this successful. Sunil has talked about some of the other people that are in the audience today that are part of his team that are also the executive directors, the SCS levels, the executive leadership of the agency. So it's that collective leadership and getting everybody on board. Finally, and we talked a little bit about this, which is don't get wrapped up in the details too soon. There are a lot of reasons not to migrate, right? Migration is hard. Change is hard. Like, let's not pretend that there's not going to be bumps and headaches along the way. The key is to not get focused on all of the reasons and the details for why you can't do something, but keep that end goal in mind. Keep in mind the being able to move to managed databases, the expansive analytics, and the other capabilities that you have when you're able to move to AWS. So let's talk a little bit about the specific migration options. So there's 3 basic ways in which you can migrate to your database to AWS. The first and the easiest, well, I won't say the easiest, but the simplest is lift and shift. This is taking the existing database as it's running on premises today and essentially moving it relatively unchanged to AWS, running it right on EC2. It's a very rapid way to onboard and find value. It provides the greatest level of flexibility. You have OS level access to your system. You get to tune it and run it exactly like you do on premises. Now, some people would ask, well, what's the advantage? Well, there's actually quite a few advantages. One is we found this with CBP's experience, which is one of the challenges is being hardware constrained in on-premises. You may just not have the physical hardware resources that you need for that database. Within AWS, we have expansive numbers of different types of EC2 instances. Candidly, it's my job, and I have a hard time keeping up with all of the different launches. I think, what was it, M6Is just came out like a week or 2 ago, and then M6As. I missed the launch announcement for it, and I just saw it when it started showing up in the console. So you have access to these hardware resources. It's also about being able to bring that database to an ecosystem. So now you can utilize things like Athena and Redshift for analytics in addition to the database that you just migrated. So enough about that. Let's talk about re-platforming and modernization. So with re-platforming, that's moving to managed. That's moving one step up. It's utilizing a service like RDS for Oracle or SQL Server or Postgres and MySQL, or Amazon Aurora for Postgres or MySQL. With there, you get advantages of provisioning. You don't have to manage the operating system anymore. You don't have to worry about scanning that for vulnerabilities or having to configure operating system hardening and putting agents on it. You're reducing that undifferentiated heavy lifting. Things like encryption at rest is a checkbox away. Multi-AZ, or a data center failover is a hard thing to do on premises.
Very hard.
But with AWS, it literally is a checkbox in the console. So we're making those types of things that are challenging to do on premises, and we're making them easy for you so that you can spend more of your time doing things like working through explain plans and index tuning in order to make those applications run faster. And then the final migration option is modernization. I'm going to ask Sunil to talk a little bit more about this because CBP in particular has a really interesting modernization story. But that's where you're really changing how you do things on premises. You're moving away from legacy and proprietary database licensing to open source alternatives like Amazon Aurora, DynamoDB, Amazon RDS Postgres. And by doing that, you're able to utilize the right tool for the right job. An example of this, a very, very simple example, and then I'll ask you to speak a little bit more about the more complicated, fun ones. Just a simple thing is traditionally on premises, we have put our clobs and blobs in the database because that's the solutions that we had at the time. Migrating it to AWS, it's a great opportunity to take that static data, to move it into S3, to replace it with a link that dramatically scales down the amount of storage that you need. It scales down the amount of compute that you need. Ultimately, that shrinks your database footprint and returns value. So Sunil, could you talk a little bit more, especially about the modernization initiatives that CBP has undertaken?
Like I think Adrian said, right? It's a very complex problem, right? It's not easy, but things have gotten better. I would say, like even I mentioned, even 5 years back, migrating to the cloud was an event, right? And especially like Adrian said, disaster recovery is another good example because it's extremely hard. The folks here from CBP, they know how hard when they do testing especially for data center failovers. Can you imagine doing that? Applications have to move, databases are moving, applications are moving. There's JDBC connections, people are techie, I know they'll probably know what I'm talking about. So all those things have to be checked out. It's extremely, extremely complex. And then you do this in sub-seconds because if you have to fail over, what you're looking at, you may see on some of these news channels, hey, see, port is down, or airport is closed, or airport is not processing people, lines and lines of people are waiting on the airport, right? That's the reason, because, so basically what we have been looking at is how do we change that whole paradigm of architecture, right? So at CBP, reliability, uptime, probably the number one along with security, right? Security is paramount. Everything is secure from that perspective, making sure the data is secure. To do that, we found migrating to the cloud probably was the best option for us. Because like Adrian said, on-prem, awesome, a lot of work has happened there. We still have a fairly large footprint in the data centers, but we have to move. Federal mandate is one, plus we are seeing very big applications, large applications, which I just can't go into that publicly, but those applications are running in the cloud, and that's how you get in and out of the country, for example, in a very quick fashion. If you use global entry, last time I was overseas, I came back, global entry took me 40 seconds, I was out to my baggage claim in 40 seconds. How do you beat that, right? Those are happening because of our XT here, plus also the architecture of what we have built in the cloud, right? And I would say the complexity of the data is what we are dealing with these days. See, if you think about even like 10 years back, right? If you remember, we would say, hey, RDBMS, traditional databases are dead, right? The new word is NoSQL, and SQL is dead. SQL is dead, no more SQL. Is that true? Not at all. I called it, by the way, not going to happen because the skill sets and other things what you have, it just doesn't go away, right? And everybody knows SQL, right? Why would you kill something like that, right? Same thing happened now. So what we have seen is every vendor now, including AWS, everybody has a SQL engine on top of the NoSQL environment. Everybody have to, right? Because otherwise, they say, oh, we'll write Java code. Go ahead, you can write Java code. Who's going to maintain it, right? All those things have played a major role and so what we've taken advantage of that ourselves. We are primarily an OLTP transactional system. 90% used to be. That number is shrinking for us also now. The kind of data we're ingesting now, as I mentioned, is not only the transactional system, it's also we are ingesting, you would say, think about like operation data kind of think about, right? Think about sensors, think about drones, helicopter. CBP is one of the rare places. We have our own Navy, which is Air Marines. We have our own Air Force, which is also Air Marine to a certain extent. It's very, very rare. So all the drones, you look at Border Patrol running drones, they all generate data now, So what we have done is telling Adrian and to his point, we have taken some of those components now and start moving to the cloud, right? So what we are saying is it should not matter where the data resides. How do you access data is what really matters. And other thing what we have done is we have, in our case, we have actually built architecture in such a way, especially for data, is that you can move to any of the data layer you want to. So what we have in CBP, we just published the data strategy. It just got signed by our commissioner. It's an official document within CBP. It's a pretty straightforward document. There's not rocket science. And one of the ladies here sitting, our deputy CDO, Trang, is responsible for that. What we have done is we have broken this into 3 areas. It's 3 simple areas. One is the data management area, what Adrian just talked about, right? And that has changed now. The paradigm has changed for that, right? It's no longer like you talked about blobs and clubs. Where do you store that, right? Now you have S3, you have buckets of object stores where you put this kind of stuff. And not only that, you can run SQL query on top of that on those object stores. Even 5 years back, you could not do that, right? It has changed completely. Pennies to a dollar now. The compute has changed from storage. Compute and storage are no longer combined together, right? Earlier, you run a query, it has to go through, traverse a bunch of stuff, bring the query back all the way to this pipe here. Hopefully, it'll come back in like 6 hours, depending on how many, what kind of query you're running. No longer the case anymore. The compute and the storage, the split between the two is huge. You know why? Not only for performance, but also for cost. You know, what do you spend a lot of money on? It's compute, right? Storage has become a lot cheaper, right? So that split has really helped us. And I feel that moving forward, that's what we're thinking. And just to quickly finish my architecture, I'm going to give a quick plug into my team here, is that we split into 3 areas. We call the data management layer. That's where we just talked about. The second layer is called the data science layer, we're calling it, right? That's where mentioned earlier, Adrian talked about it. See, earlier, the data science layer used to be the BI layer. You're writing reports. No longer the case, right? We're actually building models. We're doing AI machine learning component to that. We're building some of our agents and officers, very, very smart folks. They want to build their own models now. So they use that layer. And third layer is the BI layer, which is a traditional BI layer. That itself is becoming much smarter now. So those are 3 layers we are talking about. And for us to move forward, that's what we're looking at. So folks in the room who wants to work with CBP and I'm also working with Adrian on this. That's what we are moving towards. Our architecture is defined now, and we are going to the cloud. That's the bottom line. So, do you want to talk about
there we go.
Lift and shift also a little bit about that stuff quickly? Should I quickly talk about the lift and shift versus?
Well, I think we'll get to that on the next. So how do you decide, right? We've provided this, and Sunil has talked about, right, not just the migration of the databases, but as I mentioned earlier, all of the other associated capabilities. How do you decide upon that? And what we like to say at AWS is it's about the executive alignment, it's about the technology decisions, the financial concerns, and then what your resource constraints are. So for the executive alignment, I think we've talked about that. My co-presenter here being on the stage is key, right? Getting that leadership engagement and alignment on what you want your generalized strategy to be. Then diving into those technology decisions. That technology decision can be to maintain your existing databases. It can also be to undertake some of the work that CBP has done with the Database Freedom Program, where they have looked at some of the existing proprietary databases that they're using and have started to explore moving some of those to open source alternatives because of the flexibility and the cost reduction that it provides. In terms of financial considerations, there's a variety of programs that are available to you through AWS, whether that's things like the Migration Acceleration Program, the Database Freedom Program that I mentioned, a number of other programs in order to defray that migration cost and also to help you speed up that migration, because we do understand that during that period of time when you're in the process of migration, you have to maintain your on-premises environment, and then you also have to have your environment in AWS. And so we have programs available to help do that. For those customers that are leveraging our enterprise support program, we have dedicated technical account managers who can work with you to optimize your resources and to help with things like licensing assessments in order to make sure that what you are utilizing in AWS is exactly what you need. Finally, deciding on that resource deciding on that path is also, quite frankly, a matter of the resource constraints. How many personnel do you have? What are their skill sets? Oftentimes it is sometimes easier to migrate things to AWS and then to work through how you can continue to modernize them. So let's talk about how you go about climbing the mountain. So we break this down into essentially 6 phases, and these aren't individual in terms of it's one after the other. I know I showed it this way because it makes the graphic look way niftier than if I just put all of them all together, right? Got to go with my mountain climbing motif here. So first, we'll talk about an assess phase. So this is where we work with customers to take inventory of those workloads, to prioritize them and build those business cases. So with CBP, CBP did this work to go and consider what it was that they wanted to move and what that prioritization was, how they wanted to move it. So in CBP's case, it was, we want to move things that are the most straightforward because we want to gain that operational experience. In other cases, other customers, they decide, we want to move something that's really impactful to our business because of all of those other services now that we gain access to. Then we go through the mobilize phase. This is about pulling together the resources that are going to be necessary in order to do this migration. Building that center of excellence, identifying what it is you're specifically going to move to, and providing that long-term roadmap, taking that programmatic approach. 3, this is your migration phase. This is where you're doing that movement of utilizing services like the database migration service, or maybe using a backup and restore capability, or something like a Cloud Endure Amazon migration service. There's a variety of services in this space that you can utilize for that actual block and tackling of moving the data from on-premises up to AWS and then cutting over your application so that now your application can move in AWS. 4th, the modernize phase. And this is where I really urge customers, don't stop at number 3. Keep moving. Your journey does not stop when your database is migrated to AWS. Your journey, and this is the exciting part, your journey is only getting started. Sunil has talked a lot, not even about moving the databases as much as in the data strategy conversations. It's about data science. It's about all of the other capabilities that you have that you've never had access to before. Sunil talked about the ability to take data out of the database, to put it into S3, and then to run analytics on it using something like Amazon Athena or EMR with Presto. It's having all of those additional capabilities for analysis that you haven't had before. That's where that modernization comes in. That's where it gets really exciting. That's where things start to move faster and faster. And in doing that, continue to experiment. One of the things that was neatest is, at least for me personally, the other day I had a question from a customer. The question was, how fast was something? And I said, you know what, I don't know. And so I did number 5. I experimented. I said, rather than me go and ask questions, it's faster for me to just try it out and figure it out and answer the question. And in less than an hour, I had the question answered with a complete replica of the customer's environment. It's that experimentation, that ability to take your existing environment, to recreate it, and then to try things, to experiment, to decide what works, what doesn't work, to have those two-way doors. And that leads to innovation, and that is what positively impacts your business. So let's talk a little bit about the paths to success. So number of paths to success. One is I encourage customers, please come and talk to us, talk to me afterwards about the Database Freedom Program. We've been very public at Amazon about our own journey through this program, about migrating from proprietary databases to open source databases. In some cases, from moving from RDBMS databases to NoSQL databases where appropriate. Also, the move to Amazon RDS to re-platform. Sunil, if you can talk a little bit about how you've leveraged some of the managed services offerings to reduce that undifferentiated heavy lifting for yourselves.
Oh, thanks, Adrian. So as you can imagine, right, our number one business is, of course, CBPs keeping our borders safe and trade and travel. Right? We talked about that earlier. So as much as possible, we're trying to get away from data center. That's one. The second component is that we want to give our IT team as much experimenting, figuring out new way of doing things. How do you do that is trying to manage less as much as possible. See, as you know, database, what's the biggest pain on databases is patching and upgrading, right? And anybody disagrees with that? That is the two big important things, right? So managed services for us in general is really helps, right? So as you can imagine, we have our own cloud environments where the vendor manages the databases for us, right? Especially right now the smaller ones. Our plan ultimately is that we want every conceivable data format, from RDBMS, NoSQL, or anything else, object store databases, anything which is there, we want it to be managed by the vendor. We don't want to be in that business. Our job is to make sure our DBAs can, help our analysts to give them data in the right format and things like that. So we are fairly successful there. There are challenges, of course. There's no free lunch. I was telling somebody, everything works. I don't have a job. Yeah, just go home. Right. So there is always challenges, right? So challenges are there for sure. But good partners we work with, and they're all 100% correct. We are looking at more and more as managed services. We don't want to be in the business of managing databases.
So what are the lessons learned? So number one lesson learned is that we keep coming back to this, that executive alignment is critical. If you don't have the executive alignment, you can't, I won't say you can't, right? There's always exceptions. It is exceptionally difficult to be successful at scale. With that executive alignment, that is what gives you the flexibility and the freedom to be able to overcome those inevitable bumps in the road, to be able to pivot when something doesn't work and move to something else that does. And so you have to have that executive alignment, and you have to make sure that that's shared across the organization from the top down. At CBP, some of that is externally driven. There's a looming data center migration, so everybody understands. That helps get everyone on the same page. In your environment, it may be something else. It may be a big programmatic lift, a executive mandate, whether it's a customer experience executive order, or maybe something that's specific to your agency. Second is that there's no one-size-all solution. Of the three different options that I provided earlier, talking about lift and shift and re-platforming and modernization, CBP has used every single one of those. Obviously, it tries to do more on the modernization and the moving to managed side, but there absolutely is a place. The point is that don't lock yourself into a single solution and say, we are going to go this way and this is the only way. Use what works. And the final thing is really use AWS partners and tooling. Can give you that quick jump start. And so with that, I'm going to hand over, because rather than us keep talking. What we'd really like is to hear from you and to open up the floor to Q&A and to hear from you for what are your challenges, what are your questions. So we've got a gentleman in the back who's going to be coming around, so just raise your hand. I see one in the front here, and we'll open the floor to Q&A.
Hey, this is Rohan Oswal from Neo4j. I just wanted to understand, are you guys looking at graph database technology, and how are you using that today?
Yeah, great. I mean, we are users of Neo4j. So here's the interesting thing, right? So especially as to what we do is, as you rightly said, our mission requires looking at different angles of things, right? So our targeting team, which is part of the OIT component, they are big users of Neo4j. We're looking at Neo4j is open source. We are a big, by the way, just want to add, we are a big open source contributor and also supporter, just an FYI, including after Log4j. Even after Log4j, we still support open source, right? Exactly. So anyway, so the thing is, even with that, graphing, we are looking at next generation graphings too, right? Especially entity resolution, and we are trying to look at how quickly, see, the end of the day, right, one thing matters for us. How quickly can we provide data to our analysts? So in most of the cases, they have 5 to 6 seconds to make a decision, right? So that's what, if somebody's in front of you on a board, you have 5 to 6 seconds to make a decision, you know what I'm saying? So, you can make mistakes there, right? So my job is to make sure that the tools we are providing to agents and officers, all the men and women who are in the front, is some of the from the graphing perspective, and also how do you integrate some of the graphing perspective with other technologies, right? How do we do that? So we are definitely a graph heavy to a certain extent. We are an agency, but we are looking at different way of doing things also as to how do we see the graphing is good, but how do you display data on top for them analysts to see quickly? Not them doing their own data science experiment, but having data displayed to them saying, yes, this is what we need to do, this we should not do, right? So that's the end goal. But we are Neo4j, so thank you for your help.
We have some other questions in the back.
Hello, good morning. My name is Arun. I'm from US Department of Labor. Thanks for the talk. It was very promising for us. We are in the beginning of the journey.
It's easy, trust me, it will work.
So my question is, how many different databases you have? Which part of the journey are you in? Did you migrate to one kind of database? Yeah. I saw the slide that one size does not fit all. Yeah. How many different kind of databases are you planning to migrate to? How does your security team be okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And so you can imagine this, who we are. Pretty much the answer is all, right? Every conceivable data on the planet you can think about, we have, right? So what has happened, as I mentioned earlier, primarily about even 5, 6, 7 years back, heavy OLTP, right? I mean, mostly transactional stuff, large databases, both on the transactional for transaction stuff, also for data warehousing, all the same thing, heavy transactional, heavy warehouse RDBMS based thing. But that paradigm has shifted, especially on the warehousing / analytics side now, right? Completely has shifted. RDBMS is not going away, right? I mean, we are a big users of Postgres. We're also big users of Oracle right now. We're also big users of DB2, for example, right? Depending on what we are doing. But on the other hand, what we are doing is we are looking at, as Adrian mentioned, how do we take some of these, especially on the warehouse side. So I call it the low-hanging fruit, because transactional is our bread and butter. To keep the borders open, we don't want to mess with that initially, the large ones. But if you're looking at data warehousing, especially, right, where there's a little bit of leeway we have to move things around, those ones we're looking at how do we modernize this. A good example is, you mentioned what all databases we have. We have an HDFS, massive, 6 petabytes. And what does HDFS has? You need 3 copies on-prem. So think about how much of data you need to manage, right? We have these thousands of servers doing HDFS. Now we have moved to the cloud. We have moved to the cloud with that. It was a big effort, but within that, when we moved to the cloud for that particular one, we also re-architected some of the other components of that also. Because there are some places where it could be NoSQL was an option, but there's also object store was an option also, right? Yep. So end of the day, this combination I mentioned earlier, these things did not exist before. NoSQL was there, but object store, it was just like NFS mount where you put in data in there and just leave it there, right? Not the case anymore. Like, you have open formats like Parquet, you can run SQL queries on top of that. How do you beat that? Penny store dollar, by the way. Object store is a penny store dollar. We like that. Cheaper the better, right? That's what we like. So to answer your question, we have every conceivable flavor, but right now we're concentrating on the warehousing, reporting components, analytics components of that. Try to move that first. These are like petabytes of databases, massive, 600, 700 terabytes in certain cases, right? We're trying to do that first. SDF, as I told you, was six petabytes or so, or change. So we moved that one, and now we're in the process of looking at warehousing. But ultimately, our plan is, to Adrian's point, is even the old TP stuff, our bread and butter stuff, we are planning to break those up and create microservices. Some we already done that. It's going to be all microservices based, where we are breaking up these chunks. That's also a challenge also, by the way, we have found in certain cases. Where do you consolidate, where you don't consolidate? Every time you break it up, guess what? You have to access the other database. You have to make either an API call or some other call you have to make through materialized views or external tables, right? So complexity is not easy. It's not easy from that perspective, but you have to make a best decision possible based on the business engineering process and what that application particular it needs. Does that answer your question?
Okay. I'll pick up a little bit, which is the gentleman over there as well while I'm answering this. Don't be afraid of polyglot, even within the same system. Traditionally, on premises, you had an RD BMS from a existing vendor. And everything kind of got stored in there because that was the tool that we had at the time when we built the system. Well, today we have a lot more options. So for certain sets of tables, you probably have tables in your database that are just lookup tables. If you have something in your database that's just a lookup table, it doesn't need to be in a relational database. You can store that in DynamoDB, for instance. If you have blobs and clobs in your database, those don't need to be in your database. They can be in Amazon S3, and you can leave the link in your database. If you have, I won't ask for a show of hands. If you have requirements where you have to store audit data over who touched what in your database for an extended period of time, oftentimes you would have large audit tables in your database. Those can be exported out of your database, put into S3, and then queried with Athena. And with S3 object lock, you can also have an assurance that that data, once written to S3, is immutable until the time that the lock expires, for example, for records management purposes. So I've just walked through a couple of simple examples of how from one database, you're actually pulling it out into several different things. But what happened was you started with a very large, very expensive, in CBP's case, maybe petabyte-sized database. And by the end, you're in a much smaller database. You have some DynamoDB tables that are fully managed for you that you don't have to worry about. You have data in S3 where you have 11 nines of durability, and it's, I think at last check, 2.3 cents per gigabyte per month in our commercial regions. And your database itself now has shrunk substantially. So that decreases your licensing costs associated with that database, that decreases your compute costs associated with that database, that decreases your storage costs associated with that database. And all of those together increase the amount of innovation that you can do, and that increases the value to your end customers. So I think there was a gentleman. Yep, thank you.
Great. Lot of good information. My question is for the RDS database. The RDSs, they are great when they are standalone databases or monolithic application, in-house applications. But there are the scenario, right, where there is a cross-databases query involved, right? There are, usually they're very normal for on SQL Server or Postgres platform, right? We have the application cross-referencing multiple databases on running on the same host, right? That's where wonder what we could do on AWS side, right? Azure has got the managed instance, right, for the SQL or something like, which is close to the instance level. It gives you the flexibility, right? So that's one challenge. Wondering how we overcome in the RDS there, right? Second thing is that about like RDS take away, of course, all the hassles of patching or backups, all that stuff, right? But there are vendors applications which are certified for certain version of the instance, right? The technology.
Absolutely.
So how can you, do we have that option to keep the database on certain version, right? And patch it based on our Windows, basically, instead of yeah.
So thanks for that question. I'll answer the second question. The first one I'll defer, and I can get with you after the session. I think that's probably a more in-depth conversation. But on the second question about how do you go about managing database versions. So with RDS, the patching that you're doing is minor version patching or vendor supplied, for example, quarterly updates. And in my experience, and I can't speak for this universally, but when you're dealing with an application that's certified for a specific version of a database, typically it's certified for a specific major version of the database, and the application vendor is going to keep it current and test it with minor releases. And so that can align with your minor version updates in RDS. And of course, in RDS, you have the flexibility to choose when those patches are going to be applied during your maintenance window. When you need to move to a new major version of the database, that's something that you schedule and that gets executed. So I think there's a gentleman up there, and then I've got a couple more hands here as well towards the front.
Thank you. My question is, I heard a lot about like Redshift. I'm curious whether you guys kind of, how you guys consider that for the data warehousing like a solution in your situation, and what kind of lesson and advice that you could share with us?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, right, so data warehouse is one of the areas we are concentrating on. And we're looking at every option there's available to see what's the best architecture for us. I think Adrian has a very important point he had, right? The right data for the right data for the data format is extremely critical, right? If you're putting your blobs and clogs in RDBMS, wrong place, right? You're putting logs in RDBMS, wrong place, right? So things like that. So we are looking at how to see. Other thing we're looking at is, do you create a large data lake? I was talking to the XT before last week. Do we create a large data lake, right? What are the advantages of having? Definitely helps, because all kind of data is one place now, because you and then run some kind of good optimized query engine on top of that, right? You can do that. But you have to ask about Redshift. Redshift has its own architecture, its own format, how it ingests data, right? It's a combination of multiple things there. So end of the day, we are looking at how best from CVP perspective, what's the best architectures, our data strategy I talked about earlier, includes everything. I mean, we have a bunch of stuff. We are doing a bunch of stuff in there. So I just can't endorse any particular one. I'm just saying, but what I can just say is that we are looking at every conceivable vendor to see what's the best way of doing it. See, if you look at the formatting, it's pretty similar. They all do open source Parquet, for example, right? Pretty much on the object store, right? So a combination of object store and some relational databases and NoSQL somewhere, that's a combination we're looking at, right? So I'll tell you, Hadoop example for us, it's over for us. We have moved away. I can tell you that for a fact. We have moved away. But even from moving from there, there are challenges again there also, right? And also we are working with Adrian and team. There are certain kind of NoSQL databases we are looking at, right? Certain vendors and certain formats of that. So that's going to play a role in there. But to answer in short, answer is yes, 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 and for everybody. Yes.
for Sunil. So on the graph that had the top right, reimagine, the modernize, the graph that had the three different phases, there was one that was modernize, reimagine, and refactor.
I'll find it here.
That one there, on the far right there, reimagine, refactor. So there's challenges there and risks, of course, but there's also opportunity, because that's an opportunity for us to create possibly new database options, purpose-built, that bottom right thing, so you're moving things around. So what I see there as an opportunity is to maybe clean up some stuff that was bad and old and redundant and not necessary anymore. So instead of throwing it away, possibly you can apply some machine learning or some other things that are available today that weren't available 10 years ago to use that as an opportunity to build something that can be used in the future. I was wondering, Sunil, like in your experience with the modernize part, was there anything that you guys did in modernize that that would fit into that, and what were any challenges that you had with the modernize piece?
Sure, absolutely.
Database freedom.
I'm sorry?
We should talk about database freedom.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, so I think to Adrian's point here is that our ultimate goal, right, the utopia is that's where we want to be, right? Because every application was written 5-10 years back. I mean, this is the second component also, right? Adrian talked about the database freedom, right? That's what this entails at end of the day, right? So for example, here, move to manage the re-platform. Big advantages here too, right? I don't have to manage anything anymore. I'm done. I can sleep in the middle of the night. The vendor gets the call. Hey, my database is down, and you fix it. Their problem. But here is where, see, the stateful application, right, depending on what state the applications are, will dictate some of these. As you know, that one also is a very important one, because there are applications you just cannot refactor for. Think about cards product, very large card product, right? Think financials, think HR. You can do it, right? There are vendors who are providing service to do that, but majority, if you want to get away from the cloud, that it falls right there under. Think about some of the I can't take any name, but think about large financials or large HR or things like that. Those kind of applications, you end up probably doing a lifting and shifting. There's no choice. You may have a choice a little bit later. You may have to do a parallel effort, but if you need to get out, that's what you do there. So for us, we are all three. We're using all three here. I mean, in general, right? In general. So to your question, asking this particular one, we are breaking the application, right? XTJ here, I'm looking at him all the time because his applications are very, very large, massive databases. They are looking at breaking it up. One of his team leads also here. We discuss all the time. How do we break this up, right? And what the break looks like is critical. That's where the challenge is. I'm telling you that. Yeah. It's a business engineering See, end of the day, right? We are IT guys. We know what to do this part, right? The business engineering of our business guys, right, which is our folks in the field and are using these applications, what they want to look at, what makes it easy. Other component we not talked about is the mobility now. Now think about CBP agents and officers walking around with mobile phones or mobile devices, right? So all those components here, that plays a role here also. But here is utopia. We are trying to get there. It's not easy. Think about breaking up a 700 terabyte database. How many tables are you talking about? Thousands, right? Thousands. Think about that. How long is it going to take for you to break that up? But we are doing it. In certain cases, we have a new project going on here, combining some of the efforts from our agents and officers. When you see two people a lot on the TV, right? A blue uniform and green uniform, right? You see those. So think about combining those two applications together, how large that is. But we are doing it. The way we did it was, we said our application, I mandated that from CTO perspective, that I'm not going to sign off any architecture till you come out with how you're going to do this. So what they've done is they've taken about thousands of tables and broken it up, also removed some stuff which you don't need. See, in government, one thing is that you cannot delete data. It has to go somewhere, okay? Otherwise, I'm going to jail. You just cannot delete data. It has to stay in some format, somewhere. So we try and take that and move it somewhere else, but we try to modernize it here. I tell you, it's working out very, very well for us. It's microservices, but there was still contention of breaking those databases even at that level too. You know what I'm saying? So app, microservices, micro data you can talk about on the back end, those is, yes, that's where Utopia, we are all three, by the way, all three.
So I know we're closing in on time, so
I think this lady had a question, I think.
yeah, I try to be real quick. I just wanted to plug here our real quick, the QR codes for our AWS Skill Builder, and also our AWS certifications. So I'll give everybody a chance to pull out their cell phones and take the picture here. Everybody got their picture, or extend it a little further, get your selfie. All right. And then also, right as I take the last question here, please do, if you would, complete the session survey in the mobile app. We have both Android and iOS. If we've earned that 5-star review, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell notification. So you always get bell icon. No, in all seriousness, at AWS, we are very much a data-driven company. It's really important for us to get the feedback on these sessions to find out what works, and candidly, provide your candid feedback also on what didn't work, where we can improve. We can't get better without your feedback. Conferences like these are driven by you and by your feedback. So with that, I'll go to the gentle lady, and we'll do our last question here. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Never heard gentle lady, but thank you. Thank you both. This was a very informative, very interesting session. It is a very difficult task that you have started, and I love the mountain climbing analogy. I do triathlons, and it's those kinds of things where you're like, oh man, I just want to give up. And you have to keep going, and you're halfway through. I will keep it short, though. I just wanted to build off of what you were saying, that obviously everyone was really excited with NoSQL coming out. Yay, hooray. We're going to move away from SQL, but that's absolutely impossible. And building off of your point to partnerships, so I work at Cockroach Labs, and we're a distributed SQL database partner of AWS. And I just wanted to get your insight on the ability of distributed SQL, because that really is moving us into a new phase where you don't really have to choose between SQL and NoSQL.
Great question. And actually, that's one of my pet peeves. So if you look up my background, I come from the private tech sector myself. Those are one of the things I was actually initially working on long time ago, when these things were like unknown, long time ago. So that's a great question, right? That's the utopia end of the day, right? And it's not simple, right? Complexity, physics is still involved, right? The data, if you're running a query across multiple
Distributed
formats,
systems are hard.
yes, it's very, very hard, right? But it's become better. Think about compared to where we were even 5 years back, distributed databases are getting to be more and more prevalent, and also probably more accepted more and more. So we are also looking at that, definitely looking at that as to how do we do that, right? So as I mentioned, right, as you mentioned, it shouldn't matter the data is no SQL format in some files, or an object store, with a URL, or an RDBMS, in rows and columns, right? Or God knows what else is coming after this, right? So all those should not matter. We should be able to query things across. Other thing what we have done is, like what you said, we are actually we are a little bit further ahead every other agency. We feel we have a multi-cloud environment where we are connecting things, where we can run queries from one cloud to other cloud and run APIs across the board, and not go out and come back from our, outside on the internet. You know what I'm saying? So those are things also helping to run, for example, a distributed query, for example. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Everybody, thank you very much. AWS really appreciates you coming out this morning and joining the session with navigating the database migration journey. So Sunil and Adrian, thank you very much. There is another session. There's going to be a brief break in the room. There'll be another session of innovating with petabyte scale open data in life sciences at 10:20. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.